Roger Stone was back in federal court today for his arraignment, and a longtime associate and advisor for President Trump, he pleaded not guilty to all charges. Stone, as you may know, facing 7 federal counts, including lying to Congress as well as obstruction. Now, ever since his arrest last Friday, Stone, he's been giving interviews to just about anybody with a microphone, and he keeps on saying things like this.
I'm not willing to make up stories or bear false witness against anybody, including the president. The president has done nothing wrong. He certainly hasn't colluded with Russia.
And in other Russia probe news, Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker, he's now saying Mueller is almost done. The fact that Whitaker's even commenting on the investigation is making a whole lot of folks uneasy. Now, one of those people, Congressman Adam Schiff, he's the head of the House Intelligence Committee. Here's the tweet from the California Democrat. Quote, "An acting attorney general who refuses to follow the advice of ethics lawyers and recuse himself from an investigation in which he has shown a clear bias is the last person who should speak for the special counsel while the probe is ongoing. Mueller can speak for himself." Now, a lot to unpack, and for that we turn to our next guest, former federal prosecutor Joseph Moreno. He's served in the Justice Department's National Security Division. Joseph, as always, thank you.
Richard, good to be here.
Oh, let's start with Whitaker. First off, should we take from that A, he knows what he's talking about when the Mueller probe is going to wrap up, and B, that he actually is privy to the findings and the actual scope of the investigation where it is right now? What did you take away when Whitaker says we're almost done with this thing?
Well, Richard, he clearly was taken by surprise by the question, and he gave this sort of rambling answer that opened up a lot more questions from what he said. And namely, from the lead-in, is that why is he talking about this at all? Ideally, under Department of Justice protocol, you would not say anything about a pending investigation, much less one that is such a high-profile, high-stakes prosecution and investigation as the Russia probe. So, with so many moving pieces, the acting attorney general really made a lot of waves with his comments. Now, as far as whether he knows what he's talking about, it's true that in his role, remember, for the longest time, the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, was the go-to person at the Justice Department who had some level of supervisory responsibility. But once Jeff Sessions was terminated by the president and the Acting Attorney General, Matt Whitaker, slid in there, he assumed that role. So it is proper for him to have some understanding of what's going on. He does have some input. He does have some role to play here. But as far as talking about it publicly, that's caused a lot of consternation here in Washington and raised a lot of eyebrows.
And given, Joe, I think everyone sees where I'm going to go next with this, that the person that is probably one of, if not the principal subject of the investigation, the president himself, should we assume that whatever Whitaker looks at, he goes back and says, hey, boss, guess what Mueller's working on?
See, Richard, in normal times where you had some other type of investigation, it wouldn't be completely out of bounds for the Attorney General or the Acting Attorney General to update the White House on what's going on. However, in the times we're living in now, where the investigation is about President Trump's 2016 campaign and possibly those around him and possibly even himself, it would be really, really inappropriate to have those conversations. And, Bill Barr at his confirmation hearing a few weeks ago talked about having an arm's length relationship between the White House and the Justice Department in terms of law enforcement actions that relate to people at the White House. So this is exactly the kind of thing that nominee Barr warned about that should not be happening. So if it's happening, in fact, it definitely raises even more questions about the propriety of what Acting Attorney General Whitaker is doing and his judgment, frankly.
You mentioned Barr, and his confirmation now has been pushed back. There's some questions from Democrats about when he would release the report and in whole or in part. Do you think we're going to get clarity before the report's finished as to who's going to be getting it and how, namely we the people? Are we going to be able to see this whole thing one way or the other?
Richard, the Department of Justice regulations that govern special counsel investigations, like the one that's ongoing with Robert Mueller, talks about the special counsel being required to issue a confidential report to the Attorney General. Unfortunately, that's all they say. They don't give any guidance as to what is done with that report as far as giving it to Congress or the American people or whatnot. So that leaves the Attorney General a lot of discretion. Now, we heard from the nominee, Bill Barr, a few weeks ago that he was dedicated to transparency and he wanted the findings of the special counsel's report to see the light of day. That being said, his words at his confirmation hearing did not lay to rest a lot of concerns that a lot of congressmen and senators had about basically, is he really committed to releasing this report, or is he just saying that, but giving himself some wiggle room to ultimately make the decision himself when and if he's confirmed?
Let's go, Joe, to Roger Stone. First off, I never thought I've seen somebody seemingly so happy to be indicted that at least he gets to be part of the story. That said, what if, hypothetically, there is some recording or some thread here, paper trail, whatever you want to call it, where the president says to Stone, don't flip on me, don't worry, there'll be a pardon at the end of the day. Is that even illegal for a sitting president to telegraph he's going to pardon somebody as long as that person doesn't incriminate him?
So the quick answer, Richard, is yes, that is illegal. Now, the pardon power in the Constitution has virtually no limits to it. The president can pardon someone for basically any reason. There's no review process, there's no appeals process, there's no way for Congress or the courts to step in. It's more or less an absolute pardon power. But that being said, if that pardon power is dangled in front of someone, let's say, in exchange for them being quiet or doing something else illicit, well, then that president could face ramifications. And this is another point that came up at Bill Barr's confirmation hearing. And he was very adamant in that fact pattern that was given to him that if, in fact, a pardon was offered in exchange for someone to remain silent, that would constitute a crime. It could be obstruction of justice and could certainly lead to criminal prosecution or impeachment.
Are you among those who think that there may be another shoe to drop against Roger Stone, that Mueller's not done with him?
Richard, there were a lot of facts in his indictment that was released that were absolutely unnecessary in order to charge him with the narrow crimes that he was in fact charged with. So he was charged with lying, witness tampering, destruction of evidence. You didn't need 24 pages in an indictment to get to those charges. The fact that the indictment laid out lots of facts, lots of instances where Roger Stone acted as an intermediary between WikiLeaks on one side and the Trump campaign on the other side, it really kind of placed, put in place a puzzle piece that all of us were wondering about in terms of putting together that connection. So I don't think all those facts would be in that indictment if we've heard the end of the prosecution against Roger Stone. So I get it, his media strategy is really aggressive and he's out there before the cameras, but he should be really careful because I do think there's another shoe to drop against him.
Finally, I'll speak for myself. I think I've been wrong maybe 38 times in terms of that this thing's almost over, the Mueller probe. And even if Whitaker made it out of whole cloth, you do agree that we're probably pretty close to the finish line here, that whether it's in February or in March, but probably, before we really get into spring, we're going to have this report one way or the other, right?
Richard, you're not the only one who's made lots of predictions, some of which have not come true with regard to this Russia probe. But yes, I do agree. We've seen so much activity. We've seen cases brought to finalization. We've seen pleas entered. The more times that people involved in this matter go to court and the facts come out, that means that Robert Mueller is less concerned about what is being revealed to the public, which means to me he's closer to the end than he is to the beginning. So I'm not going to make a prediction as to when it's finished. I'm not going to make a prediction as to what he's going to actually find, but I would make a prediction that we are probably in the home stretch here. We're probably going to see something in the coming months, and whether it's Acting Attorney General Whitaker, who resides in that spot still, or Bill Barr is confirmed, or someone we don't know about yet for whatever reason, I do think there's going to be some serious decisions to make.
All right. And Joe will be bringing you on when those decisions need to be made. Joe Moreno, thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. Always a pleasure.
So coming up next, you know the name. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez getting a lot of headlines. She's also alienating a lot of colleagues. She's even talking about having another member of the New York congressional delegation primary. I'm talking about a Democrat that she's part of the same group with. Now, we're going to be joined by another member of the New York delegation, Congressman Espaillat. He's going to join us after the break to weigh in on this controversy and much more.